All right, this is Arthur Busch. You're listening to Radio Free Flint, and we have a great show today for a change. This guest here is going to be way better than almost all the other ones we've had, with a couple.
Oh, no pressure.
With a couple of exceptions. Jeff Gibbs, welcome to Radio Free Flint. It's nice to see you again after such a long period of time.
Nice to see you again. Yeah, I think I don't know when the last time it was, but we go back to Bowling for Columbine, that's for sure.
We did. We first met in I always forget the year, 2001 or two, or
2001.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember the day we met, which might have been your first day working on that movie, as I remember, right in there. And well, we might as well tell that story. That is kind of a good story, isn't it? Jeff, of course, has been involved with many movies over the last nearly 20 years as a producer and director of one sort or another. And let me read the list, Jeff, so I'll save you the time, and you can add to it. His most recent movie is Planet of the Humans, which is what I invited him to talk about. Fahrenheit 11/9, and also Fahrenheit 9/11. Those are two different movies. He did one with the Dixie Chicks, had some involvement with Shut Up and Sing. He did one, Michael Moore in Trumpland. He worked on Bowling for Columbine, is what we were just talking about. And he did a film, The Lost Picture Show. I'm not sure what that one was all about.
Just a brief interview somebody did with me.
Any event, Jeff and I met when our mutual friend Michael Moore was working on filming the movie Bowling for Columbine. And I remember that November day because we were going to have Mike come to my hunting blind. For some reason, we got this crazy idea that he would go meet hunters in this movie about guns. And he couldn't get any insurance for his film crew and sound crew. And the people in New York or Canada or wherever they're from, then they thought it was too dangerous to go to our hunting camp without insurance. But anyway, Jeff and I had a lot of fun that day. The day ended at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we weren't drinking.
We weren't drinking, not much. No. Yeah, the day started out for me. I was a social worker at the time and I had a job that really sucked. And, I'd been through a lot and just had to hang out of that job for personal reasons. So, but I had actually taken a sick day to go to a doctor's appointment. And I got a text from Michael about 11 o'clock, I think it was, an instant message in those days. What are you doing? Oh, not much. You think you could meet us in, St. Helen? And the reason he knew I wanted to be involved is I grew up in Beecher, Flint, Beecher just outside of Flint. And, my description of Beecher is it's a place for people too poor to live in Flint. And he says, well, how fast can you get there? I'm like, a couple hours, whatever. It's 100 and something miles away from Traverse City to St. Helen. And he was like, well, see if you can get there. It was snowing the first day of hunting season. So I got in my car and started to drive. And he's like, okay, see if you can find where the buck pole is. Okay. And see if you can find where the school he went to was and where the house he grew up in was. And see if you can find these 3 people who knew him and see if you can find like 4 more other things. I'm like, okay. So you guys were in Flint doing some filming. You were in the van, I think, with the whole crew. And so I drove like a bat out of hell, got to St. Helen. And it turned out, I went into a grocery store. I don't know what I'm doing. I just said, anybody know anyone know anything about Charlton Heston? So somebody said, go to the library. So I went to the library, talked to the librarian, kind of mentioned Michael Moore was coming. She looked at me funny, but she said, just Charlton Heston, it's interesting. He's never given any money to the library here, but we do have a Charlton Heston display. So she got out a township map and put everything on the map. And then you guys pulled up like 15 minutes later. So I did this impossible thing of finding all these things, handed them the map. And instead of me getting to jump in with the film crew, Michael was like, well, go over to with Oscoda to see if you can find anything out about the two Columbine shooters. The one, Eric Harris that lived there, right? I think so.
Klebold was one of them. I forget his
Klebold was the other one, yeah. So
Dylan.
I went in. Nobody would talk about Harris. I mean, I went into the newspaper. They were like, a couple of the reporters were like, sure. And then I came back a few minutes later, and the editor was like, get out of here. We don't want to talk to you. So I went into this gas station. I saw a kid working there that was he was looked about the right age, and I asked him if he knew Eric Harris, and he said, well, kind of, but I knew him sort of. I went to school around that time. So I said, oh, okay, great, will you hang around for Michael Moore? So then I was hanging around with him all day. You guys showed up. I think we went to dinner. I think I don't know remember if I got any food or not, because I had to make sure the kid didn't get away. So at midnight, when his relief came in, I asked him, I said, oh, you're about the same age. Did you go to school then with Eric Harris? He said, well, I never met him, but I got kicked out of school for, bringing a gun. I said, well, that sounds great. Why don't you come talk to Michael Moore too? So they, the first kid wound up being gun boy and the second bomb boy. And that night we both drove down to Davison.
Yeah, we had trouble. My memory of this was you and I were sitting outside at 12 o'clock at night, and we were getting tired. And Michael still wanted to go to Lapeer or something crazy. And then, we said, we're going inside this bowling alley after we had went inside it to see what it was all about. And Michael, who doesn't drink, I said, we're going in here to get a beer. And he's mad at us because we're in there drinking. And in there, we started talking to these kids, and their story was just unbelievable, I thought. And
no, those were the two kids we interviewed that were the ones that worked at the gas station.
Yeah, well, we bought that kid a drink is what happened. So we kept him interested. And then I came outside and I said, Michael, you got to come inside here. This place is unbelievable. And these kids inside are unbelievable. You got to see this. And then he starts arguing with me about it. And I said, first of all, we ain't hanging around on no street corners when it's raining and cold in November. First of all, just go inside and see what it is. And then we started arguing about who could best set a scene, me or him. And that got into, I said, Michael, there's lights in the background. There's like machines. There's like, lots of stuff that would look good on TV. And then when we went inside, it was really quite my memory was, it was unbelievable. Once he got started interviewing those kids, that was pretty memorable.
Yeah,
tell him why it was memorable.
Well, the first kid at the gas station was the one that set off bombs in his backyard, and was upset because he wasn't number one on the scary list. And then the second kid that relieved him with the bandana was stealing guns and selling them in Detroit.
The gang kid in Detroit, and the kid was making napalm in his garage.
Yeah, that didn't make the movie, but the first kid was also making napalm. But so I went. Michael and I went to drove to Davison. He dropped me off, or I dropped him off at his parents' house, and I went to my parents' house. And I faxed in my resignation to my job at like 5 a.m, and just never went back.
Well, I didn't give up my day job. We kept rolling, but it was quite a memorable evening because one of the things about our friend is he's relentless once he gets started. And I remember we had been to the buck pole in St. Helen, and I had convinced Michael to go to St. Helen because Charlton Heston was raised there. And there's a bunch of drunk kids got on his porch one night because he had a house in Lake St. Helen, and they burned his house down. So we were all interested in finding little Charlie, as the librarian used to call him. And then we interviewed these kids at the buck pole, but we were so excited, and it was such great footage. But the problem was we didn't have releases. So then Kathleen wasn't too happy with us because we spent all this time in St. Helen with film that we couldn't use. Anyway, Jeffrey.
Well, yeah, you can use stuff without releases. There's many things in bowling that don't have releases, and it's it's just so people know what you're up to.
Well, we had just been we had been through this whole ordeal with Roger and me, which happened a few years before, and at that time there was a bunch of litigation that ensued, and so both Michael and I, we both knew that releases were a good thing.
Releases are a great thing, yeah. And Michael's a genius at knowing what he wants. People present him all kinds of things, and he always makes the right choice. And I've never seen a single person outsmart or outguess him with his involvement or what he wants to film.
Yeah.
It's
well. Anyway, I want to talk about you. We'll talk some more about him another episode. Maybe we'll even get him in on it. But Jeff, you've one of the things I learned during my involvement with Bowling for Columbine was, after all these hours spent with you, I never realized you could play the piano.
I can sort of play the piano, yeah.
I was stunned by that. Tell us about that.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I've kind of dropped, for one thing, I haven't had time to do much music, and I've dropped talking about it because, right after Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11, if I mentioned doing the music, people would just assume that's all I did was, oh, here's Michael Moore's composer, but I can't even play Happy Birthday on the piano. I just kind of do solar piano, improvisational stuff, kind of, if people have heard George Winston, a little bit like that. And I like, to play around on the synthesizer and the drums. So yeah, after, working on Bowling for Columbine a couple of years, helping to produce, so many scenes that you see in the movie, the music fell through. And suddenly I got a call. I'd never been to New York except for a couple brief visits. And, it was Carl Deal, our one of our producers. And basically he said, you got to come to New York right now. Our music fell through. And Michael wants you to come see what you can do. I'm like, okay, I've got one little keyboard that I could afford. And he says, oh, by the way, you have 5 days. But don't worry, just see what you can do. So I got there, and it was the same thing. When I met you and the people in the van, I didn't know what a DP was. I had never met a film crew before. In New York, I had no idea what Pro Tools was, or recording engineer I'd never met in my life. So they gave me an engineer and a little recording setup, and it was so crazy that I never even had a room to work in. They had a portable setup and so every day I would show up, and wherever there would be an empty room, we would meet, move the keyboard around. So it wound up being, I think, 10 or 15 tracks that are in the film with the music, and the most emotional stuff, of course, that I was really happy, if happy is the right word to do, was some of the Flint scenes and some of the scenes that you're in and that you were part of. And I think that's the most emotionally, at least for me, powerful part of the film, is when we're talking about Kayla Rowland and Beecher and what happened in Flint in those days. So, but it was a lot of pressure. But later I tried to fix and improve some of what I did in those 5 days, and it wasn't. There's something about the rawness and being right in the moment, I think, both for filming but for music, that really helps. So, and then I didn't screw up Bowling for Columbine too bad, so they invited me back to do Fahrenheit 9/11, and I was the co-producer and the composer. So about a year into production, suddenly I've got a room now full of equipment, musical equipment, but I'm running back and forth between the edit room and the production meetings and the composer suite.
So you worked on, you did essentially a good part, if not all, of the Bowling for Columbine soundtrack. And then Fahrenheit 9/11, which was a film that Mike did about George Bush. And I think that film at the time was the most watched documentary film of all time, wasn't it?
Oh, it still is. I mean, it's yeah, it was only 2 years after Bowling for Columbine too, and Bowling for Columbine broke the box office record. I think it was by 4 or 5 times that Michael set with Roger and me, and then Fahrenheit 9/11 smashed that by another 4 or 5 times. So it's still the largest grossing documentary of all time by a pretty good margin, especially if you consider all total sales, DVD, global theaters. It's around $500 million worth of
Yeah, there's
sales.
a lot of people watched all these movies. I've gotten mail from around the world, and still occasionally do. Um, you also did some composing for a movie called The Edge of the World. I'm not sure if that was your own production, right? Or
That was not my own production.
is that the At the Edge of the World? Is that the proper name?
The Edge of the World. It's a film that I worked on producing. Worked with the editor to get it cut right, and the composing too. And then it was a film that then the producers made some changes at the last minute and kind of turned down a couple festivals. And by that time, the TV series came out, so then it kind of got buried. It's a film about a sea shepherd and the resistance to whaling that activists do, and actually physically get in the way of these Japanese whaling ships. So it was a movie I was proud to work on, but it kind of died in a vacuum like a lot of films.
And then in 2005, you won an Ascap Award, which is the American Society for Composers and Publishers, I think.
That was for the music in Fahrenheit 9/11, and I think the context was that what people forget about Fahrenheit is that at the time of the Oscar nominations and awards, the box office for Fahrenheit 9/11 was greater than all the Best Picture nominees put together when the nominations were announced. So
Wow.
it was quite the phenomena, and I think that's what was the impetus for the music award.
And in all, you've worked on, I don't know, Capitalism, A Love Story, another Michael Moore film, one called Darling, the Peter Dirkes story. I don't know.
I contributed some music and a little bit of advice to a young filmmaker for that.
Yeah. Well, it's quite an accomplishment for a kid from Flint. And where did you go to high school, Jeff?
I grew up in Beecher. We moved around a lot. In some ways, we were homeless. We lived with my grandparents and borrowed homes. And so mostly in Beecher, a couple times in Flint. And then the last year of school, I went to Davison. Things were getting a little bit rough, and I had younger sisters, and my parents wanted to move right then. So we moved to Davison. I guess we escaped to Davison, which I kind of felt guilty about because I was kind of a moderating force. I was student council president and class president, and didn't react to a lot of the tensions. And I'm not saying I would have stopped it, but the next year there was a whole lot of trouble, and I think people, even students like me and families bailing, and looking out for ourselves. I guess it was the right choice, for my family, but it was even now I've escaped up north, I'm lucky, and it's, we all have some responsibility for abandoning, the places that we grew up in. But I think it's, maybe you were saving this question, but one of the things that allows me to do this work is that I'm from the wrong side of the tracks. Flint's always been a very unique place in that it has a powerful sense of community, no matter whether you're from a wealthy part of Flint or a poor part of Flint. There's a powerful sense of community. And we had that in Beecher too, and I really experienced that as kind of a survival mechanism where, neighbors and people would look out for each other and knew each other. I knew my teachers. I could walk a block to school. But, you know, also the roughness. And even when I was a kid seeing these, do you remember seeing these near the Turnstead auto plant? These like open pits of like, they look like something from a science fiction movie that if you fell in, your hand would melt off, you know. There were oil tanks around us. I remember hearing the trains constantly clanking. There were, even back in the 60s, we had to watch where you walked so you didn't get into a knife fight. There weren't so many guns then. So, and just experiencing how the, even when it was working, the industrial complex there kind of wore people down mentally. You know, it really affected their minds. And obviously it affected the environment, you know, the rivers and the landscape. So in some ways, the way I attribute my part in Michael's films and with my own work is that I grew up in a preview of the end of the world, in a sense. And it was never given that you were going to even survive, you know, where we grew up. And so I think having that perspective that what we have around us, all the nice things are not a given, and that it doesn't always hold together, I think informs my experience as a filmmaker, as a thinker, as a human being, in a way that unless you've maybe lived in a war zone or something, you just haven't experienced that. I went down to New Orleans, you know, after Fahrenheit, and while I was thinking about what to do next and thinking about climate change and environmental collapse. And, you know, when I visited the Gulf Coast and it was just shattered, and New Orleans was just shattered and abandoned, and stray dogs running around, I thought, oh my God, this is like Flint in a day. I mean, it's like we went through, you know, what New Orleans went through, except it happened by deindustrialization.
Slow motion.
Yeah. So the first, you know, every time you made a change to a film, you've got to watch it all through. I just spent the morning. That's what I spent the morning doing, watching our film. There was one little tweak we were making for a different release we're going to be doing. And the first 30 or 40 times I watched Bowling for Columbine, you know, I was choked up or crying. And I don't know if you had that experience, but this is all very real to me. It's not just a job. It's really real. And did you have that experience too after the movie came out that it affected you?
Oh yeah. Well, I had that experience during the episode.
Well, you were living through the story that's at the heart of the film with Kayla Rowland and the little boy.
That was a tough time for me personally, as well as our community. But my mother was very ill, and she passed away. It was just a crazy time in my life. I was sick, and I got pneumonia someplace along the line in this, and ended up in the hospital, and then was just overrun with the responsibilities of my office and the responsibilities to try and make sense of what had happened at that school in Beecher. But I understand what you're saying exactly. Jeff, you worked on, I don't know how many of Michael's movies, more than a handful, which have won all sorts of awards. I mean, just about every award somebody could win in documentary filmmaking, you've had your fingerprints on it or your hand in it in some way or another. How does that association with your lifelong friend, Michael, how does that play into the creative side of what you've done? I mean, obviously you two have some chemistry.
Yeah, that's, I think I had a unique perspective because having no training or career in this, I came in with fresh eyes. So I sort of made mental notes, or it stuck in my mind anyway, of everything he was doing and what he would say. Like one small example was going into one of the Bowling for Columbine's interviews that I had, I think it was Bowling, set up. You know, I was excitedly telling him all about this interview we were going to do and what they had to say. And he said, you know, be careful not to talk it all out with these people before I get there. Because the first time somebody expresses something is really the genuine moment. And so, you know, it's like, oh, a light bulb went off. Like if I talk it out with them, they've kind of expressed some of that energy. And some of what we're doing when we do interviews is is the gift, even if it doesn't make the movie. Very few people ever get listened to solidly and clearly. So that's one of the ways I look at what we're doing is it's the gift of listening and listening well. But just little things about how you approach, the interviews. I mean, I always do a lot of this. I film myself, or I learn to have the camera like right here. If even there's a camera person, it's like right here. And Mike Desjardins, who's from Detroit, another Michigander that worked on these films, he kept bumping into me when we were doing interviews when Michael wasn't there. And he was like, I'm like, so he was just like, I learned, so many little tips and tricks, things that people wouldn't know, like about James Nichols, that's in Bowling for Columbine, right? I don't know, you were there. I don't know if you were there then.
No,
or
I
not, but
passed. I told Michael I wasn't going to go to that one. I went to a
Yeah.
bunch of other places.
That was a good choice because we're sitting there. It was, of course, the cell phones didn't work. It's at that time rural area, but that was a 4-hour interview. And the context is, James Nichols is like our cousins, and we may despise what they've done. Love what they've done. But these are people we know. And so that was a 4-hour conversation. The same with the Michigan militia. They got to say.
Before you move on with Nichols, just explain who he is.
Yeah, he's a brother of the Oklahoma City bomber, and appears to have been involved. He was like saying, "Oh, I've had fertilizer and gunpowder, bomb making stuff. It's just normal farm stuff." And he's got I got a gun here and here and there, and but it's that sense of, it's a 4-hour conversation. It's going in with a, even Charlton Heston, it's the common bond of having loved Charlton Heston as a kid that underlies so much of what you see in our films. So I think it's just that level of understanding. And my background as a social worker kind of fed into that kind of empathy, if you will, even towards people we disagree with. And I always go into everything saying, even if I think I'm right, when I'm researching something, I've got to make double sure of that and look at the possibility I could be wrong.
Right, and it's your the combination of your people skills and your intuition that's been such a remarkable asset for you, as I've watched your work over the years. Excellent. So you and Ozzy Zenner and Michael got involved in this movie. As I understand it, your movie Planet of the Humans was started a long time ago. Is that right?
Yeah. The basically my quest for what the hell is going wrong on this planet, and why are we just going on like everything is normal. I think I experienced that when I was a kid, growing up in Flint, like just something doesn't seem right about this culture, this industrial civilization. And but my solid quest for it began, 1999, 2000, where I noticed the trees dying and I noticed so many things going wrong. So really I've been a solid, with the exception of making these other films, a quest for what kind of mess we humans are in and how we might get out or not, for the last 20 years, pretty solidly. And then the movie that you see, Planet of the Humans now, most of it was filmed, post 2009.
And it would be perhaps correctly described as an eco documentary, which explores the survivability of the planet, and also looks at what some solutions that have been suggested for cutting down greenhouse gases and the use of fossil fuels. And you've explored some of the assumptions that we've used to save the planet. Is that fair?
Yeah, right. It's a movie about starting out asking questions about, how bad are things, and quickly shifted to, well, people seem to know that things are bad, so why are we not making any progress? And then I began to uncover that all the solutions that we were thought were going to save us, don't work as advertised. And really, ultimately, it's a movie about, even if all those things did work, it's not about having more solar panels. You know, it's about the fact that we humans and this civilization are way beyond sustainability. So even if we could use solar panels to solve climate change and wind turbines, you know, we're facing so many multiple threats, and we're also going to run into resource depletion. You know, so there's a lot of things that are just mentioned in the film, but I'm hoping to get into in future works. But yeah, it's my discovery that things are worse than we think, and all the green solutions we've been promised are not going to save us.
One of the things, you know, that I learned, because I worked with Mike for quite a few years myself in various capacities. One of the things that I learned about documentary filmmaking was the best documentaries are those that look for answers, and they don't have the solution before they get to the answer. And this movie, as I watched it, I thought, wow, that movie has the right premise. What is the solution? What is the answer? So you're out there with honest, inquisitive questions, and that sort of sets, and then people can get into that search with you. So you're taking them essentially on a journey, and I guess you're doing some storytelling along the way, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the nature of storytelling. You know, if you want to make a documentary that appears on PBS, that's fine. You know, then you make it about something, right? But a movie that will show in theaters, or in this case, be experienced as a movie on the internet, since theaters were closed, you know, it's got to be a quest or question, and I think that's true of all Michael's films. Is, you know, you don't quite know where it's going to go next, and most documentaries, you too predictably know where it's going to go next. So I tried to recreate in this film my journey of uncovering, you know, solar and wind. I mean, I guess, you know, sometimes arriving at this place now, like, oh, I know this stuff doesn't work. You know, you forget that, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't put this in the movie, but I actually built a solar collector for the science fair in high school. You know, when the log cabin that I had in the woods, I got it all wired up for solar panels, but at the time they were too expensive and I couldn't afford them. You know, so I've been like wanting this to happen forever. I always used to read science fiction, and I would always pay attention to, you know, how is this going to be powered? How are they actually going to do this? You know, and usually there wasn't an answer. It was just a make-believe thing.
So your quest in your movie essentially was to look at what our current circumstance was, and then see what people had proposed to address it. And some of those things are what we call clean energy, renewable energy, all these kind of buzzwords that you began to look at seriously and actually ask questions about. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. And that's how I met Ozzy, because halfway through, you know, I actually had some cuts of the film, but he wrote this book called Green Illusions. So I found another liberal environmentalist who was asking the same questions, because I didn't want to get involved with conservatives who are questioning it, because they don't even believe in climate change. They don't believe that could ever run out of resources. They don't believe that extinction's a big problem. So I didn't want to get involved with that at all. So yeah, I just basically, you know, ran through everything I ever made on Michael's films, which wasn't that much, but it just gave me a little bit of a base. I bailed on New York, came back to Northern Michigan, actually, you know, just rented a back room for my sister for a while and put everything I had into making this film, because I you know, and it's such a difficult thing to talk about in some ways, because, you know, I was just writing some notes this morning. The Democrats last night at the Democratic Convention had a thing on climate change, and the solution is, you know, green energy, green energy, green energy. What's like, there, you know, green energy, like might be able to hear the wind because I'm sitting outside in this conversation. You know, that's green energy. The wind, you know, could be drying my clothes right now or sailing a ship. The sun, you know, is warming the house or providing light. That's green energy. But that these machines, these giant pieces of technology are labeled green energy, are labeled green. It's amazing how I ever fell for it, or we ever fell for it. And it's amazing that the proposal to save the planet is to plaster hundreds of thousands of square miles of the earth with giant machines made by industrial civilization. It's like, that's just going to run us off the table faster. But that's why I stopped going to parties and made a movie, because it's a hard thing to bring up at parties when everybody's cheering for this, you know, this savior that we're going to have.
Well, one of the things you looked into, and which I have long been not a big fan of, and that's biomass.
How did you know about it? Because most people had never heard of it before the movie.
You know, if you look back at ethanol and how ethanol got started, and the whole notion that we would go pay farmers to give us their corn, which is supposed to be food for animals and people, and that we're going to somehow make that gasoline, that never appealed to me as a solid idea. And I started getting wind that with all these big agribusinesses, agri-farmers or business farmers, that it was really more about them than it was about me and my car and how much I paid for gas. And when I watched this movie, you started talking about this subject, and I think you came to the same conclusion I did during the movie. I don't know if that's reading my own feelings into it, but I think that's what you're trying to say, is that the form of the discovery was more important to those making money off it than it was for those it was supposed to help.
You know, I want to bring that biomass back to Flint and Detroit for a moment, but before I forget it, I want to mention, because I said, you know, some harsh things about, you know, it is in many ways our experience there. My experience was like the end of the world, you know, living on a dirt street, being, you know, semi-homeless, you know, and, you know, not having enough to eat quite often, and seeing the effects of industrialization. But I just want to say to the people that live in Flint and have always been from there, there's always something beautiful about people from Flint. And there's been many amazing talents come out of both the harsh conditions and the sense of community. When we were filming Bowling for Columbine, some of my teachers were still there. Marty Crane, the award-winning track coach, who could have went to Michigan State, made hundreds of thousands of dollars. He stayed with those kids till he retired. You know, it brings me to tears, the dedication and the amazing talent that's come out of Flint. So we're kind of like Liverpool or some other rough places where there's just so much creativity. And I want to say that's true of people living there now, and there's much being put into the community, and things have been, before COVID, people have been working relentlessly to help the community and to make things better. But one of the things that you may be aware of that's not in the movie is that there's a biomass plant just outside of Flint in Genesee Township. And not far, you were very near Beecher. And where is it? It's an industrial area. It's a poor area. And, you know, of course, they're burning trees, but they probably have been burning construction debris and all these other even worse things for the air. And burning trees puts out a lot of pollution. So Flint, you know, all these biomass plants quietly crept into these areas where they're going to affect, you know, poor urban people or poor rural people. You know, in Flint, this isn't in the movie either, but, you know, our friend Dane Walling, who made some terrible mistakes, a good guy who made some bad choices, you know, too eager to get in bed with business. So he brings this, you know, human waste to energy fuel plant, this kind of horrible idea from Sweden, brings people in, they build this plant, you know, it smells, you know, it's just, it's a dead end. I don't know how much grant money they got for this, but it was probably a lot. And then in Detroit, you see briefly in the movie, for a couple decades, they had a giant waste incinerator that they got green energy credits for. It's closed now, but it was poisoning the poor people in Flint. And some people say, well, you don't have enough people of color in the movie. Yes, they're in there. They're getting harmed by these schemes, poor people and people of color. And I remember, nothing to back this up, but you know, reading the paper, the Detroit Free Press coverage of the the Detroit Marathon, and one day there were several people in one marathon that dropped dead. I'm like, what the heck? So I looked up the air pollution. It was bad air pollution, and it happened to be starting near the waste incinerator. I'm like, do people even know to check for these things? You know, it's just, you know, I'm not, who knows what caused it, but I'm just saying, you know, so this biomass and biofuel thing is just so hidden, but everywhere. And that Detroit incinerator is closed. I don't know if the human waste to energy thing in Flint is going or not, but it's just, to me, as people say, oh, well, you know, they're doing better with ethanol. Just a sign that we would burn these things and go down these roads in the name of green tells something about where our minds have gotten in our desperation to get off fossil fuels and to have a green solution that will allow industrial civilizations. Really, these green solutions are not about saving the planet. They're just about keeping our way of life going. When I think our way of life, with 8 billion people consuming on this level, is just, it's coming to an end.
Well, first of all, let me.
Sorry for the soliloquy, but you got me worked out there.
No, it's okay. The incinerator in Flint was in my district when I was the county commissioner. So that's what was hatched during that period of time by the Genesee Township government and Consumers Power, I think, at the time. And what ultimately it's been used for is to take the, you know, literally thousands of demolished homes. They just take those over to the incinerator and burn the stuff. So that's what it became. And an interesting story.
Tell people what's in these demolished homes that they're burning.
Oh, all kinds of stuff. Asbestos, lead paint, arsenic is part of this. All kinds of heavy metals are in this stuff that are released into our air. And ultimately, what happens is it pollutes the neighborhood in the nearest proximity. So way back in, I forget what year it was, 88 or 89, there was a group of citizens that was led in part by Father Phil Schmitter and Sister Joanne from the St. Francis Prayer Center, who brought litigation to stop this incinerator, and they claimed that its licensing was improper. They didn't follow the proper procedures of the EPA, and that it constituted environmental racism. First suit in the country, I believe, at the time, that argued this theory of environmental racism. Basically, I think it was 23 years later. If you want to know more about this, I did a podcast recently with Father Phil Schmitter, and he talks about this in our conversation. At the last day of the Obama administration, the EPA, I think it was EPA, anyway, the administration concluded and issued its finding after all this litigation that, in fact, they violated the rules, they didn't follow the rules, and that the plant itself constituted discrimination based on race in its location. However, the plant's still chugging along. And that's a remarkable story. Someday somebody can write a book about that, those warriors.
Yeah, there's so many stories, and this doesn't make the press because it doesn't fit the narrative about green energy. And also because these are happening in poor neighborhoods, people don't have the resources, to sound the alarm and get these citizen groups. They're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
But one of the things I discovered in Michigan was that one of the reasons nothing happens is that they've made the oversight, the State Department so toothless that they're not even able to shut down these plants, for a violation. They issue some fines, they issue some warnings. I mean, it's nearly impossible to shut them down once they get built. And I actually believe, who's the owner of the Detroit Pistons is from Flint? Tom Gore. Tom Gore's, and he's from Geneseeville, too. Right. So,
well, he didn't have anything to do with the incinerator.
No, he didn't. But I'm just saying, I'm just throwing out a name. he could do something, you know, if he chose. There's so many of us that are not paying attention to where we came from, and the water crisis is one thing, but there are so many ways people are being poisoned. In the Detroit Incinerator, did you say that that's been closed now?
No,
Obama shut that down.
it's still going as far as I know. No, they just ruled that it was not, they didn't follow the right procedures, but they let, you know, they just kept on going. It was already built by that point and had been operating for over 20 years. How they could keep litigation going that long is beyond my comprehension. But I
And there
do
were
know
people
this.
arrested. There were scandals around that, and it financially really hit the city of Detroit horribly. And Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, their similar incinerator, which I may have closed, I'm not sure, but almost bankrupted the city. You know, and still, the waste energy has not been removed from green energy. I guess they're doing it better now, but I don't think any civilization ever saved itself by living off its own waste.
Oh, no, I can't imagine it can. And the biggest biomass operation we have in this nation is the whole ethanol scam,
Right.
which is to buy Iowa farmers off and turn their corn into fuel that nobody wants. We just down the road from me here, the local pub actually sells gasoline that doesn't have the ethanol in it because it rots out the motors and the fuel lines, and so people don't want to run this stuff in their vehicles, not because of the energy savings, but because it actually costs more money and damages the engines. Jeff, I want to talk to you a little bit about the what may be one of your conclusions is that the infinite growth on the finite planet we have is essentially suicide. I think that was one of the things which you in this movie seem to highlight. And tell us why you believe that's true.
Well, it's, you know, first of all, it's interesting when you bring that up. It's because I still even now have this little bit of resistance where I'm even afraid to say how bad I think it is. And now the reason I do is because I'm a hopeful person, and I think our only hope comes from being honest with ourselves about the mess we're in, we've created. But you know, if somebody jumps from a building and people are saying, oh no, that's you're gonna die. You know, everybody that says you're gonna die is wrong. You know, they're wrong at the 100th story, the 99th. They're wrong at the 50th floor. They're wrong until that last story. Even the 10 feet up, they're still wrong until that moment. And that's what I fear we're in. You know, you see in the movie this graph of our human population and consumption, basically a measurement of our economic growth. And it just, and all the way for hundreds of thousands of years, the last 10,000 years, and just these last few hundred years, it just goes up to a height that you almost can't show except on a movie screen. And the idea that somehow a species can expand that much in their impact on their environment, and that's any version of that is sustainable, just it's mind-blowing to me that that's not the headline thing for every environmental movement. That's why carbon alone. So, you know, so we've gotten away from understanding that the purity of copper has declined by maybe, I think, a few orders of magnitude. And so it takes more energy to get out the copper. You know, the iron has decreased in purity. You know, we're shipping, instead of iron and copper from Michigan, we're getting it from all around the world. You know, it's as you see in the movie briefly, the amount of fish we got from the ocean has declined the last couple decades. And we're making that up by using fossil fuels to underpin a system of fish growing on fish farms, so we don't think there's a problem. You know, instead of wood and everything, now we have plastic and everything. You know, the fish in the Great Lakes, you know, we have to actually raise fish in the lakes to, you know, so there's all kinds of limits approaching. The water situation in Flint, how can it be in the Great Lakes if we don't have enough clean water? You know, almost nowhere in the world can you actually go out and just drink the water. But the majority of the underground aquifers that provide the drinking water and farm water, you know, over half of those are depleting faster than they recharge, and some took thousands of years to fill. the topsoil has decreased by half. So this is why, you know, I don't know what, I don't have the answer except that some people are talking about degrowth, but the idea that we're going to keep growing, and the idea that even if everything, my fellow Democrats, and I am going to vote for Biden, you know, and Harris, they're just, and I'll be honored to do so rather than Trump, but this is where we've lost our minds. We're promising the people a green version of this unsustainable human growth and this economic system of capitalism and industrialism that's destroying the planet. You know, have you heard the study where 70% of the pollinators in one study disappeared in a couple decades?
Yes.
And it's not just all climate change. It's, you know, habitat loss, primarily, pesticides, you know, everything we humans are doing.
Right. Now, one of the things your critics have essentially made up from what I watched in this movie, and that is that you were advocating population control. I don't think you ever used that term in the movie that I could see.
Oh, no, you can't bring up population. Don't dare talk about it. It's like, yeah, population, no. You know, after the movie came out, you know, I just went and looked up a couple of things. The BBC reported reported on a UN study that said the decline in nature, the 40 to 50% to 60%, whatever it might be, decline in nature the last few decades is directly related to a doubling of the population and a several time increase in our consumption. And I always mention those two together because they're intertwined. You know, I think it's a sin to talk about population without talking about consumption, which is why I did it in the movie. For them to single out population is bizarre, and they came up with bizarre things that come from their minds. You know, nobody I know that cares about population talks about population control. And you think about the millions, you know, Gloria Steinem, several years back, she talked about population and climate as being related. And she said the biggest crime of all is that there are millions of women being forced to have children. So yes, bad things have happened in the name of population over history. But the relentless thing is, because of rape, because of denial of birth control, because of denial of access to health care and education, women are being forced to bear children. And so that's not in the movie because I just wanted to set the stage for there are too many people consuming too much. Our addiction to economic growth, industrialization, and capitalism, all these things are intertwined, and it would be ridiculous to remove any one of them from the conversation.
Correct. Now, one of the things I think your movie does a great job at is it's really in the great tradition of American muckrakers to some extent, because what you did to pull a sheet off of the Sierra Club and Bill McKibben was absolutely masterful. The attempt to interview him as a former prosecutor and having watched lots of people on witness stands, I don't know that your interview was particularly an ambush of him. But the fact that he didn't want to talk to you was quite remarkable to me. I could not, still to this day can't figure that one out.
You know, it's funny, that's ambush. First of all the people that we pigeonholed on the street and just said, hey, we got a question for you. What do you think about biomass? They had no problem going, oh, that sounds like horrible. I don't like that. And then a lot of them said some very intelligent things about it. But the situation with McKibben and the other environmental leaders was that we were allowed into this media pen, and we had a minder that was taking us around to who we wanted to interview. So we actually led over to him and to the other interviewees by a minder and then actually, if you said, you see at first, he kind of says, oh, hello, Jeff, like he's heard of me. I have talked to him personally before. And so we had a nice little talk before it came to that question. So just to set the record straight, that's how that came about. I hope I did okay, but I just, you know, I still have hope for these people, and I was really hoping that he would come around. And so I didn't want,
I guess the way I looked at it was, he didn't want to answer questions that were fairly straightforward and should have been easy for a guy that runs a big outfit like the Sierra Club, number one. And number two, whenever I used to even talk about an investigation and then see the correction, the remedial action that's taken before you even do anything, this guy really was caught at what it appears to be self-dealing. Did I miss something here, or?
Say what you mean by self-dealing.
He looked like he was profiting in some way from some of these solutions that he had been advocating as the head of one of America's most reputable environmental organizations.
Something doesn't seem right. You know, we're clear in the movie. I don't say that he's profiting. I don't know that he's profiting. I don't know if he has investments. I don't know if he does, what they're in. But something, you know, they all were hiding things. I know what some of the others were hiding. For instance, Van Jones, his Apollo Alliance, they had that giant trees to ethanol scheme that was going to take trees from 100,000 square miles in northern Michigan. His Apollo Alliance had actually put a pin on a map and was bragging about that as one of their solution projects. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he was involved with an investment scheme that was also going to invest in that biomass, biofuels trees scheme that was going to decimate Michigan and others like it. So with Bill, we don't know. I know that within a week of the movie festival premiering last year, he wrote an essay coming out against biomass. And some people say, well, why didn't you put that in the movie? Because I'm very used to people covering their ass by putting out a statement. And then he's gotten involved with stopping some small biomass plants. Well, if you're the leader of a national group, if you're really against it, that national group begins to fight it. You don't just write an essay. You actually, when you talk about fossil fuels, you also say, and no biomass and biofuels. And then you're probably used to this too. He wrote a very narrow definition, like, I'm against woody biomass plants, you know, but what about all these ethanol plants? What about all these waste to energy plants? You know, and what about the timber companies? They get a lot of the green energy subsidies because they use their waste from logging operations to run a power plant, and then they get green energy subsidies for that, you know, which, you know, so there's so many, and then they get biomass in the name of forest restoration. So some people say, well, why didn't you put that he wrote this op-ed against biomass? It's like, because as you see in the movie, we're used to people being duplicitous like that. And maybe you can say something about that I'm not aware of, but is that a normal thing for people caught, public figures?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You see it all the time. And the best of it is Trump. He's square in the middle of all kinds of stuff. And the first thing he says is, you know, that guy, Steve Bannon, he hasn't been involved with me in a long time. And then he was against the wall. Now he's against the wall. You see this all the time. This is old school gaslighting. And what's interesting about it is, and when I've served on close to 20 nonprofit boards of directors, for the guy that runs an organization like the Sierra Club and to be asked where he's getting his money, or to be challenged about where he gets his money, and he doesn't know where it comes from or how much it is or who's giving it, is preposterously, outrageously duplicitous. And
glad you brought that up, because I was just watching through the film and I was thinking about that, and you know, you can almost see the wheels turn where, of course, he knows he's taking from these. The Rasmussen Foundation is a very, very wealthy, you know, hedge fund, investment banking, you know, family and foundations in Northern Europe. But you can almost see the gears clicking where finally he just embraces it and says the Rockefellers have been, you know, a great ally of, you know, 350.org. And they've been, you know, he doesn't say they've been giving lots of money all the way along. He doesn't say that they gave millions to him and another organization called One Sky, which they merged with. So they were almost, you know, in a sense, they're a startup of the Rockefellers in one sense. So, but I think I'll post, let me mention this. I think I'll make a commitment to this at some point in the next while. It could be a couple weeks or a couple months, but I think we'll post that section of the film because it's gotten so little press, where then you go on to see what's in these green funds. And I know that they've rejiggered them now, so that you probably can't see it, but you know, all these oil companies and banks and agriculture companies, biomass and biofuels, the world's largest fracking company and the one recommended by the Sierra Club. It was just unbelievable. And you know, so there's so many things that we did research that it's still stunning to me that nobody's written a news article about
Some
this.
might call it plausible deniability. You know, that old concept where if you some of these capitalists that are getting involved in so-called green energy do it out of, I often thought they did it out of a guilty conscience, just to show, you know, it's sort of like if you say somebody is racist in the south end of Flint, and they say, well, I got one black friend, he's my best friend. And you get this kind of stuff, which is just hilarious. One of the things that's interesting when I watched your movie and then was reading some of the reviews of your film, you know, I was raised in evangelical church in Flint, and I always was amazed because I loved to go fishing as a kid, and the pastor would talk to us and the Sunday school teacher about how the Bible says that people are supposed to go take dominion over the earth. And then not long ago, I guess maybe within the last few years, I read where the evangelicals were righteously indignant about how we're not solving this environmental disaster that's come on us, global warming, and that somehow this has become an evangelical Christian issue. What if anything do you have to say about that? And why doesn't that come to play to moderate some of these people?
Yeah, it's a complicated issue, and I did spend some time with an evangelical family, and you know, we don't have most of us don't know the original Aramaic that the Bible was written in, but you know, I had come to understand one of the phrases to be so for God so loved man, right, humans or whatever, and this family, this Christian family said, no, it's supposed to be for God so loved the world. And then he said, it's bigger than that, it's the universe. You know, there's been a lot of things happen in Christianity where I think women had a much more powerful role early on, and you know, were removed by the patriarchal nature of the church. But you know, I want to look at it a little bit different frame, because that's, you know, I think traditions have both good and bad, but I think we went down the wrong road when in most native spiritual traditions, you know, everything has a spirit or is alive. The Great Spirit isn't meant to be a person or great grandfather up there in the sky. It's, you know, that when you pray in native tradition, or you give thanks, you're giving thanks to the actual, you know, ancestors, the rocks, you know, the other living beings, the trees. And so when we put whatever we believe in out there in the sky, that kind of removed the sacredness from everything. And I think that opened the door to a lot of destruction. So, you know, I think we have, this is why in the movie, I don't provide a lot of answers, because it's multidimensional. I think we have to have a new spiritual approach. I'm not saying it's a religious approach, but we don't have the sense that everything's sacred anymore. I mean, can you really tear up a mountain that's 1 billion years old for coal? If it's sacred, can you tear up a mountain that's 1 billion years old for copper for your solar panels if it's sacred? Can you destroy a desert that's been around, you know, for that habitat for millions of years to put up some wind turbines? I don't know. That's what we're not asking. Is like, when are we going to stop? And I think if we all lived, you know, even if we're more poor and we live in community, I think we'll be better off. But I think that's our only hope. I don't know what degrowth looks like, but Flint's an example of a place that's experienced degrowth. And what if we would have planned for that? Planned for how to keep the water safe, planned for how to keep everybody with food, you know, for green spaces and safe spaces, for work, for shared resources. That's what I'm interested in, because I think the pandemic has taught us nature's going to degrow us whether we like it or not. And if nature does it, we're not going to like it at all.
Yeah. And one of the things that I heard, maybe it was one of your other interviews that I followed, you talked about the pandemic having an interesting effect on the environment by essentially forcing people to live local. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. Well, just I want to be clear, you know, because there's been some, even though climate change is very real, I believe everything gets blamed on climate change because they're trying to sell us more solar panels, or the story solar panels will save us. So yeah, climate is a horrible tragedy that it's going to get worse, but does not equal this total human apocalypse that we're creating. It's a subset of it. And so the poaching of animals, the last wild animals in Asia provides this bush meat for people to eat. And the disease is believed to come from bats. It could have come from pangolins, from these persecuted animals and persecuted ecosystems. Got into us. It kind of solved the human problem in a way, because to nature, 8 billion people is a problem to be solved. We don't understand that. So this is like as harsh as it is, a warning that nature's trying to solve us, and it's going to keep trying to solve us. So yeah, you know, we're giving up on it, but being forced. Look how, I think my point was that you heard, is to save ourselves. Most of us in a day turned around. We got to stay home. We got to stop flying. You know, we stopped consuming so much. The sky turned blue. Where I live, I saw all kinds of birds. I saw eagles. I saw swans. I saw endangered shorebirds. You know, I saw all kinds of things just come up because there weren't any people around. And so I think it's a taste of, if we planned for an existence where we stay home, live locally, I think actually we'd be less neurotic. I think, aren't a lot of us happy to have stayed home now instead of going off to these offices, you know, where we're sealed up in a tie?
Well, I don't know. I need to study that one a little better. But
Think about it.
what
But
are
thank you for your insights. Is anything else with your background as a prosecutor or an attorney or an activist watching the film that caught your eye? I'm just really interested in what you had to say there.
Oh, I'm interested in people that lie about their money, and I've always learned that you follow the money in a lot of these situations, or you look for the motive. And McKibben, not knowing where his money came back from, merits its own film, because I think the answers might be quite entertaining. I don't know if he's, you know, from all appearances, I have other friends that say he's a saint. He didn't look like a saint, and I don't think you were trying to make him look like a villain. He did that all by himself. So I'm interested.
You made a good point. This was a trail we followed. He was like, "Oh, you picked this out from all this footage." No, we were just following the money trail, and this is where it led. And when it leads to the Sierra Club, you know, Michael Bloomberg saying his, you know, $30 million for the Sierra Club is an investment in the Sierra Club, and nobody flinches. That's a little clue. Something is going on, right?
Yeah, I think so. Let's wrap up with this. It's a question that's long troubled me as I've watched Michael fend this off, whether it was General Motors, whether it was the NRA, whatever group, organization of people that the documentarian has chose to shine a light on. They all think that the retort is always some minutia, that you didn't get a statistic right, or that you didn't have the solution, or your solution's bad. And I don't think a documentarian is particularly an advocate for solutions. as you pointed out earlier, you're asking questions, and then that
Yeah.
leaves the viewer then to come to his own conclusions. And I find it interesting in your movie that somehow you were supposed to come to this marvelous discovery of what the total answer is to climate change and to population of the earth and the exhaustion of resources. And I don't know that you have that much power, do you, to come up with? I mean, you almost would have to have some godlike authority to come up with the total answer. What the hell do
That's a
these
very,
people expect?
yeah, that's a very good point, because one of the things I learned in social work and in community change is that people have to own, and we know this. Even I did a little bit of business consulting, just for a brief time, but people have to own a change and they have to be part of it. So even if I had the answer, we have to co-create how we're going to deal with these very delicate issues of consumption, capitalism, industrialization, economic growth, overpopulation. We all have to create the vision of what that feels like, it looks like, that's going to be kind and loving to everyone in its nature. So, and nobody goes to see that movie. If you make a movie about solutions, people aren't going to go, because people don't go to movies about answers. They go to movies about questions and quests. But everybody demands it of documentarians that you have the answer. And the third thing I'll say is sometimes it seems like, well, what happened? It's very disappointing that what happened with the guns in Bowling for Columbine, after, in the years after, but it did open up a discussion like nothing ever before. And with Fahrenheit 9/11, at the time, we forget that everything was really controversial that was in Fahrenheit. I mean, the torture that was happening in Iraq, the lies that Busch and everyone that led us to war. It didn't even feel permitted to make that movie. People forget now, and we were actually fearful. I mean, we were covering our windows when we were making it. Now everything in that movie is just normal. Sicko, what happened with that? Well, then it's part of the education of ourselves, and we got Obamacare, at least a halfway step. Capitalism, a love story. I really attribute, before nobody was talking about socialism in the normal world before Capitalism, love story. And Bernie is in there, and Elizabeth Warren is in that movie, and suddenly they had permission to talk about it. So I think this movie, the fact that we upset people, is actually a good sign. And it's a sign that they actually don't feel that great about themselves, that they're so vicious in their attacks. And
Well, yeah.
I'm hopeful over time that the conversation will happen, and we'll begin to get some new insights, and collectively, and I'm going to be putting some more things about this and about where I think we should be going. But you're right. Yeah. Oh, I had to diagnose the problem and the solutions. Yeah, I'm not that smart.
Yeah. Well, if somebody wants to watch this movie now, The Planet of the Humans, which was released, by the way, on Earth Day, April 21st, as I recall.
The day
And
before Earth Day, yeah.
if we want to watch it now, where do we go?
planetofthehumans.com. And it will be free for a little while longer, and then we'll be announcing some other ways to watch it. It's also on Vimeo. You can go there and rent it or buy it, but we haven't really announced that yet. But so if you want to make a donation, you can go rent it or buy it on Vimeo. But it's right now, Planet of the Humans. It's free on YouTube, and you can get to that link by planetofthehumans.com. And
Okay. And Jeffrey, I appreciate your the time that you spent with me. You have now set a record for my longest podcast guest. But I could talk to you for a long time about this and other movies. Maybe one day we'll get a couple of alumni of the Michael Moore School of Film to tell old war stories, because we have a few more that we haven't talked about. But it's good to see you, my friend, and I wish you the best with your movie and with your other endeavors. What's next for you after this project?
that's what I'm trying to figure out: a book, a series, another film, or all of the above. So that's what I'm working on. Just
Well,
figuring out what has the biggest impact, because the clock is ticking.
yeah. Well, whatever it is, the people of Flint should be proud of you. You're probably the quietest man in town, in our town, and have accomplished one hell of a lot of stuff. So congratulations to you and best wishes.
Thank you for
Oh,
your insights too, Art. Very, very great to hear your thoughts on things and very astute observations. So thank you.
thank you, Jeff. Well, this is Arthur Busch, and you've been listening to Radio Free Flint with our guest, Jeffrey Gibbs, the producer and director. I think he was even called the writer of Planet of the Humans, along with
Yeah.
Michael Moore, who's the executive producer, and Zenner. What's his first name again?
Ozzy Zenner.
Ozzy
Yeah.
Zenner, who is also a co-director, I guess.
Co-producer. Yeah.
Co-producer. And I hope you all get a chance to watch it. Goodbye. Take care, and thank you for listening.
Thanks,
and
Art.
we'll be back. Goodbye.